Hey guys, welcome to the Field of 68 YouTube channel. If you like what you see here, hit that subscribe button and you'll get more college basketball content just like this. I don't think that you're going to change the AD's mind, right? If he is on his way out and if he is trying to make a hire for himself and a hire that he wants to make, and if he went from Nate Oates to Scott Drew to Dan Hurley to Mark Pope without hitting any of those other big kind of obvious names, the Sean Millers, the Bruce Pearls, the Chris Beers, the Billy Donovans, the guys of that ilk, without actually talking to any of them, which it does not appear that he did, and does not appear that he made an effort to go get. I mean, when you go from Scott Drew saying no in the morning to Dan Hurley in the afternoon to Mark Pope basically being hired that night, all in the same day, then it kind of feels like one of those things where that was the next guy on the list. And if that was the next guy on the list, then I think it's clear the process that Mitch Barnhart had when it came to making this hire. And if his process was, I'm not hiring somebody that has something in their past or something going on beyond just being a basketball coach, then I think that you can kind of see why he ended up here. So what I would say is this, if I was advising Kentucky fans, is buy into it, right? Maybe it's not going to be great the first year. Maybe it'll take 2 or 3 years to kind of get this thing going. Remember, the guy that all of you wanted to hire, that every Kentucky fan was clamoring over, was Dan Hurley, who did not get out of the first round of the NCAA tournament until his 5th year at UConn. The rebuild for UConn started was probably a little bit of a bigger rebuild than from a program perspective than I think Kentucky is going to be. You know, I think that they were a 3 seed this past season. When Dan Hurley took over, they were under 500 the year before, playing in the AAC instead of the Big East. So it was clear that it was going to be a slower grind for UConn than it should be for Kentucky. But it's one of those things where if you can kind of get behind him and get momentum behind the program and get the resources that he needs to kind of make this thing work, then I have a very strong feeling that this is going to be something that will work. Now, does that mean in 5 years you're going to be winning a national title with a chance to go back to back like Dan Hurley did? Who knows? You can't predict that stuff. Winning national titles is so incredibly difficult to do. There's a reason why there's only 3 active coaches right now that have ever won it twice, right? It's Rick Pitino, Bill Self, and Dan Hurley. And I think that being able to, instead of, I want to make sure I phrase this the right way. Instead of creating a negative atmosphere around the program where it might disincentivize players from coming in or boosters from donating NIL funds or sponsors from getting involved with the university that can help develop and build out that collective. I do think that getting behind the hire makes a lot of sense because he is the antithesis of a lot of things uh, that the fan base, from my understanding, did not really like about John Calipari by the time we kind of got to the end. He is one of your own. He loves that university. He loves that state. And if this ends up being something that is a failure, then it ends up being a failure. If it ends up being a complete bust, then it is what it is. And I'll eat my words and I'll go back on it. But I just don't think a guy that has taken BYU and made them a top 20 BYU made them a top 20 team 3 of the last 5 years, despite the fact that 2 of those years came in the WCC. And one of those years was after a transition to the Big 12 when they were projected to be the 13th best team in that conference. Remember, nobody thought BYU was a tournament team. Everybody thought BYU was going to walk into the Big 12 this year and get their doors absolutely blown off. They won 23 games. They went 10-8. Yes, they got smacked in the first round of the tournament. Yes, he has not won an NCAA tournament game. I get all that. This is a guy that I think has outperformed the expectations and the resources and what he should have been at the previous jobs that he was at. And I don't know if he'll do the same at Kentucky, but I do think that you're looking at a guy that is going to make this team be relevant, be nationally competitive, excuse me, be in the mix to go out and win SEC titles. And he's going to do it playing a style that you are going to enjoy watching, that is going to be aesthetically pleasing, that is going to be modernized, that is going to be up tempo, that is going to be pace and space, that is going to have a lot of three balls going up. And he is a guy that is an engaging personality that I do believe can walk into the living room with people and be able to own that room. Not in the same way that John Calipari is, but again, you ran that guy out of town because you didn't want a guy that was John Calipari anymore. And I think that Mark Pope, there's a sincerity there with him. There's a genuineness there with him. And he's got a basketball pedigree, played as many years as he did in the NBA, won a national title on the best team that we've ever seen in the college basketball ranks. So I don't want to sit here and tell Kentucky fans how to feel, right? If you want to be frustrated, this is where you ended up. Be frustrated that this is where you ended up. But if I gave you the framework where the decision was go out and get one of Nate Oates, Scott Drew, and Dan Hurley, or find somebody that doesn't have any baggage with them, then what are your options here? What are your choices? You didn't get one of those three because Nate Oates had an $18 million buyout and wanted to stay. Scott Drew had God telling him that he couldn't go to Kentucky, and Dan Hurley basically said no to what I guess was reported to be a $100 million contract, right? If you're going to say no to a $100 million contract, you probably don't want to be in a certain place. So I get the frustration if you're going to be frustrated, but I would like you to tell me that if you take those four guys that I mentioned that all have something in their past off the board and just say that that was a non-starter, where do you go once you get past those top three? Do you want to rate potentially another week and a half to get Billy Donovan if you had to? And even then have a 25% chance, as Jeff Gooden reported earlier, a 25% chance of actually getting them. I don't know if it's worth the 8 days and the most important time that there is when it comes to recruiting the transfer portal. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You guys can bookmark this. You can save it. You can let me eat my words. You can come back at me. But I do think that he is going to have Kentucky in and around the top of the SEC, in and around the top three seeds, and in the mix and in a position to threaten to make it to a Final Four and win some titles and hang some banners at some point in the next 5 years. And if it doesn't, then I guess we're going to be looking at a situation where we're going to have another coaching search here very soon. And I can tell you by the numbers that we've gotten over the course of the last 3 days that a coaching search for the University of Kentucky's head basketball coach is not necessarily a bad thing for the Field of 68. So, yeah, that's all I got here. I'm looking forward to seeing what Mark Pope can do there. I'm looking forward to seeing how he puts together his roster this season and how quickly it takes him to be able to do that. And I will just say this, right? Again, it's a different situation to what Ed Cooley was walking into at Georgetown because there's much more infrastructure and much more framework. And I think it'll be easier to get kids to commit in the year one. But I understand why I've seen that comparison pop up a couple times on my timeline and a couple mentions. So I understand. I know I don't understand, but I just wanted to comment on that really quick because it's very, very different right now trying to rebuild Kentucky's team and rebuild the Georgetown basketball program because Kentucky fundamentally as a basketball program is not broken. The fan base is still there. The passion is still there. When I was in Rupp Arena, there were 23,000, whatever it is. It was completely packed to the gills. It was as loud as I've ever heard that building when I was down there. Right. I think that the crowd was very obviously craving a team that played that style. Like the passion of Kentucky fans is unmatched. It is there. When it comes to Georgetown, you got to battle and fight and scrap just to get like 3,000 people to get more than like 2 rows of students to show up. I mean, they haven't won any games in the Big East in like 4 years, man. I think that those situations are very, very, very different. And I would be utterly flabbergasted, utterly shocked if Mark Pope had a first season at Kentucky that was in any way comparable to Ed Cooley's first season at Georgetown. So we could just stop that right now. You can just shut that thing down right now. Thank you for watching the Field of 68. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, hit that like button, share this link with your friends, or check out the description for some other places that you can consume Field 68 content.